This situation should have been a wake-up call, and it really is worrisome. This labor movement was not built by highly paid professional staff. It will not be saved by highly paid professional staff.
Are you on? Which side are you on?
I think we have a friend of the show, Chris Townsend, in the Zoom now. Is that right?
Yeah, hello. How are you?
Hey, Chris, I'm doing well. Great to have you, brother. Appreciate you coming back on the show and appreciate your support as always. And I'm just going to start here because you've organized a lot of workers over the years. You're not someone who just talks about this from a theoretical perspective or from book learning. So before we get into some of these big picture issues I wanted to talk about today, just tell us a little bit about, your experience and how that actually informs your analysis.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Adam, and thanks very much to Jake's work and the Valley Labor Report. Everybody should support it. But as to the question of whatever I've done in my 46 years, I have organized a lot of workers. Organizing in a labor context has a very specific meaning. We find unorganized workers or they find us, we put them through whatever the process is of organization, some sort of an election or some fight for recognition from their employer. Some sort of a first contract is hammered out with that employer, usually over their great resistance. And then they pay dues and begin to play a role in the life of the union. Become eligible to become part of the union structure, maybe activists, or they'll run for office or something. So having been at it that long, I have had considerable success. What do I mean? If I counted up what I've participated in as a worker, a voter, a participant, when I was in the shop, or as a staff guy, volunteer, or staff guy who was working on a campaign, or later, the end of my paid career when I was the organizing director of the Amalgamated Transit Union, I would estimate about 25,000 people were touched by some piece of the work that I did. Probably half of them, maybe more than, maybe 2/3, I would have been largely responsible for doing that. And you could look at that and say, wow, that's a lot. Or you could say, well, that's a drop in the bucket. But I guess I want to say I had the opportunities to be involved in that kind of organizing because I did start in a period of the labor movement where we were much larger and much more active. Organizing today has been shunted, in my opinion, to a side railing or abandoned altogether in any serious way. And we're not running enough elections. That's the crisis. We're not fighting enough recognition fights if we're not going to run elections. And I guess for the younger generation and the newer folks coming along, they just do not have the numbers of opportunities to participate in things that I did. I mean, when I think back, when I first joined the Amalgamated Transit Union, we organized the city of Tampa. I was just a little guy in one of the departments, but it was 3,600 people that we succeeded in organizing. It was significant. And it wasn't too much longer after we had organized that. We organized 3 additional transit or public properties in Florida, right in that area. So by the time I was 20, I had probably participated in the organizing of over 4,000 people in a very small way, my own contribution, but it exposed me to the whole process and to what happens, what the employer does, how the workers react. So I think this is what's forgotten, and we have a real dire situation today that everyone may not agree with. But if you actually take a look at the people who are writing and speaking and in some ways leading the discussion about organizing the unorganized in the United States today, a majority of them have never organized anybody. And Adam, you know that I harp on this, and I'm not harping against the people who are raising the dire need to organize the unorganized. They are well-intended, they're hitting the nail on the head, but they only bring a really limited theoretical view or their own opinions to it. I would agree with an awful lot of it, but there's no particular insight that they bring, and it doesn't stimulate very much. At least that's been my experience. So I think it's really a question for and I appreciate you guys. You guys regularly have people on the show who actually have track records of accomplishing things and organizing the unorganized and then taking them through contract fights as leaders in their unions. So that's who we should be listening to. There are many successful union organizers out there, but I venture to say that most folks, even listening to this show, would have a hard time naming any of them. They might name some of these would-be celebrities online or whatnot, or folks who are diligently cranking out articles and books and whatnot, but they don't bring any tangible success or anything of any significance to the table. So I hammer on this, and you guys may get tired of it, but this is kind of my drumbeat in any event.
Well, no, I'm glad that you do harp on it, because I think it's part of just keeping it real and being accountable to each other and recognizing that if we're going to talk about the crisis of unorganized workers, it helps to talk to people who've actually done something about it. And, like you said, it's not to dismiss that, folks don't have things to add to the conversation or can help in bringing a spotlight to this issue. But, you have a track record of actually organizing workers. And that's why, I guess my first real question for you is, I'm curious to hear, what questions you think we should be asking folks, and what are some of the things that we should be talking about in light of everything going on right now. We passed Trump's 100th day. We've got these threats from multiple directions. We are facing crisis upon crisis. So, yeah, I'm curious just to hear your perspective on, what are some of the things that we should be asking about and talking about?
Yeah. One comment flowing from, when I opened up there, but it segues to your question here. The labor movement today functions in an equivalent way to somebody who would take their car to the shop because they heard a noise in the transmission or had some reason to think they had a transmission issue. And when they got into the shop, they would find the service manager and say, "Hey, buddy, I want you to look at my transmission, but I have an additional ask. Can you please assign to my transmission issue somebody who has never worked on a transmission before, or maybe only seen one, or maybe worked on 2 or 4?" And this is, of course, an absurd proposition when we talk about our transmissions in our vehicles. But this is the functional equivalent of what most of the labor leadership does today. It hires people with little to no experience, or even people who have been around a considerable time and still have very little experience because of circumstances. The training is dreadful, in my opinion, or non-existent. There's no one to talk to in many unions. I have a long line at my doorway of people find their way to me who are young organizers, new organizers, and they just want somebody to talk to about the very complicated process of organizing workers today. So that brings me to your question. I don't have much to say to people other than, what are you doing to further real union organizing? What are you doing? If you happen to work, most of us work, not everybody, but most of us work, in younger age brackets at least, are you actually thinking through? I mean, if you're listening to this show, you're probably inclined to know something about what we're dealing with. So wherever you work, what are you doing to lay a foundation to organize a union there? What affirmative steps are you taking? It's going to be different for different sectors where people work. But are you beginning to speak to coworkers? Are you thinking through contacting a union, forming your own union? What's that going to look like? How is your employer going to react? We can almost safely say that the employer will react very badly to this notion. After all, union organizing is not some theoretical exercise. We are organizing a rebellion of workers in a workplace where there is no democracy of any kind. The workplace in the United States, newsflash, is a dictatorship, getting worse. in many ways with the surveillance and the spy systems that they're now able to put together with social media and whatnot. But what are working people doing? If you're not in a direct situation where you could do that or participate, everybody has friends and family. What are you doing to talk to workers who should belong to a union or might need a union, which is practically everybody? I mean, one thing we share with you all in Alabama is a very low union density. I'm up here in Virginia. I'm on the north top side of the South, but our union density is about 4% in Virginia. So just about anybody you would run into and talk to on whatever basis of contact or friendship that you might have with them is in dire need of a union. So it becomes that, and then it also becomes, what are you doing to funnel these people to the existing unions? I mean, I find I run union organizing schools, and this last week was a good example. I had meetings with probably 50 people involved in half a dozen different union campaigns in multiple different industries. And one of the greatest challenges I have is finding an existing union to take that seriously and do some of the things that need to be done to encourage that and build a workplace organization, a committee of people initially who are then going to, see what they can do to move the process along wherever that process may lead. So I just am increasingly convinced that if we don't do that, if we don't begin to revitalize these trade unions, build and expand these trade unions, we will be extinguished. And it would be a tragedy of epic proportions, but it would also be a debacle for the progressive movement, the left movement, because the trade unions is where quite a bit of the resources are and where the actual contact with real people is. So I take this very seriously, and all of us have to accept that responsibility of it. What are we doing to concretely move union organizing forward? That means talking to people, investigating leads. EWOC, I think you guys are familiar and have had folks on from EWOC, the Emergency Workers Organizing Committee. They're doing this. And sometimes it's clumsy and sometimes it's amateurish. But boy, do I have to applaud it, because there's somebody at the other end of that line that says, well, you need a union. Let's talk this through. Let's figure out what the things are that you really need to do, as opposed to just daydreaming about it, theorizing about it, having opinions about it, arguing amongst each other about this or that. Let's get down to the doing part.
Yes. That really resonates with me because I just get so frustrated because I feel like there's a lack of action, a lack of urgency among so many in our movement. And, I'm sure some of this is shaped by my perspective as a Southerner in a place where the movement has been in retreat and decline for so long. But there, it feels like a lack of urgency often. New organizing is rare. You can just about count on your hands, how many new union elections happen in our state year after year. And, something else that you mentioned about getting unions to take on campaigns. When I helped to organize the nonprofit I work for, we reached out to 4 or 5 different unions, I think, before we found one that would take us on. And mind you, this is the easiest possible kind of union campaign to take on because it was a small shop. We had an organizing committee that represented each department on the organizing committee. We had our list. We had our one-on-ones. We had gotten verbal affirmations to the union unanimously of the entire unit. We just needed a sponsor. We were doing all the work. We had done all the work. We were going to deliver a bargaining unit on a silver platter to whoever was willing to say yes. And shockingly, some people said no. And that really was an eye-opening experience for some of us to think, wow, if some unions are hesitant to even sign on to a campaign that is just being delivered to them, how hard is it for workers in much tougher situations who are facing attacks from the boss, who are facing a divided workforce. How hard is it for them to get that kind of resources and support? So that really resonated with me, because I was a little surprised. I'd heard the difficulties that a lot of workers get when it comes to trying to get a union to support them. And but yeah, I was surprised when it happened to me in such an ideal, nice kind of scenario.
Yeah. Yeah, think of that, Adam. I mean, here you were, a very friendly organization, or at least a friendly group. It was unlikely that there was going to be some sort of a civil war erupt in your workplace, a sympathetic employer with its mission and whatnot. Yet even with that, you have to pound on numerous doors to try to get in. I want to mention Jacob puts together the weekly report on activity of the trade unions in the southern states. And it's very sobering to look at that. It's encouraging. It's very inspirational as you go through those reports about who's organizing, who's bargaining, who's got special situations in their unions and their workplaces. But I recall it was sometime, 4 or 5 months ago, where he literally was able to document that their entire week had gone by in the entire United States southern states sector, which is the largest geographically and the largest in terms of population of the several sectors, Northeast, South, and West in the United States. And it had an entire week where there was not one successful union election. Now, I look at that and I put that responsibility right at the feet of the trade union leadership that we have in this country, because it says something about the priorities of our labor movement. And I want to say, we'll probably get into this. This is part of what you're thinking about, everyone's thinking about at this point. What's going to happen to the trade union movement as we are increasingly bludgeoned and pulverized? We've seen now the federal employees just blasted, dues check off canceled, contracts ignored, and all this. Well, what's the reaction? I'm going to be specific. What's the reaction of the largest of the federal government unions, AFGE? It fires half of its staff.
Hey, 5 seconds. Just wanted to say that this is only possible because of our donors. If you want to see more of this, then consider donating yourself at tvlr.fm/donate.
So I look at this and I say, isn't this how a corporation would do it? If it lost a bunch of business, it would lay people off. I hope, I don't know for sure, so I'll be careful, but I hope that there's some discussion in that union of people going on to unemployment and continuing to work and continuing to do the work, and people maybe coming out of the shop and working on their own time. A whole spirit of voluntarism. I mean, I'm hoping that there's a tremendous amount of that going on, because, I mean, this is a catastrophe in many ways. Let's just stop half the functioning of the staff of the entire union, if you presume that those members have a valuable purpose and actually do something. Holy smokes. But I'm not selecting them out of any animus. I'm rooting for them. But I mean, this mindset that says that somehow the entire labor movement has to be run in an administrative way, with monstrous amounts of dues collected and staff paid and salaries and benefits and all this, and posh conventions and travel and per diems and benefits up the gazoo for the. I hope that this era is coming to an end, because the resources are so needed for organizing and mobilizing and getting out and actually reaching into the workplaces to recognize your situation was really should have been a wake-up call for this labor movement, and it really is worrisome. It's worrisome. This labor movement was not built by highly paid professional staff. It will not be saved by highly paid professional staff.
Yeah, I think that's one of the toughest things, right? Is how do we get that spirit of volunteerism among working people who are already working too much, too many hours, not enough time in the day. They've got family commitments and this and that and health issues. And right? And it's so tough to find that balance of, supporting the workers with the professional staff where you have that capacity, right? Because that's another thing I've encountered is where, organizations have professional staff and have the resources to do it and still, aren't committing them necessarily. But yeah, I think that gets to a lot of the issues that we're dealing with. And one thing that, this brings me to is that's kind of hopeful, I think, is that there is a lot of new energy right now, around fighting Trump, protests that are happening regularly, and folks are newly activated, and it does seem to be across the spectrum of age, from students to retirees. We're seeing a lot of retirees and older folks who are getting involved and, just looking for a protest, looking for something to do, right? They want something to do. People are fired up and they want something to do. And so something I've been thinking a lot about and wrestling with is what is our message for these new folks? And for those of us who've been, slogging away at this, trying to build a working class movement for years, how do we effectively tap into this new energy and these new volunteers?
Yeah, I mean, isn't this the question of the day? Let's go back in time. History sometimes is our guide. If we go back 100 years, 125, 150 years ago, of course, a different time. But the way you joined, the way a worker related to the union, joined the union, stayed in the union, you went maybe to a union office or you went to an individual who was already in the union and you joined and you paid dues. And you kept track of that as best you could. And it was frequently irregular. You'd pay a few months, you didn't pay, you pay a few months, you'd drift away, you'd come back. Many inefficiencies. But the union had a far wider contact with individuals out there that it could actually activate in emergency situations. Today, trying to join these unions is in some cases an impossible proposition. I have a name brand union. I will not embarrass them by mentioning them, but everybody has heard of this union that I have tried 14 different times to contact that union to introduce them to not one, but two different groups of people who absolutely belong to this union. One I have no doubt can be organized without too much uproar. The other one, not the case. But this union is literally impenetrable to an outside force. I figure if myself as a long veteran, knowing all the angles, how you might do that. There's no way. I've tried the online forums. I've called. I've talked to members, asked them to have someone call me. I've called union halls, offices. You get voicemails. You don't get a call. I mean, this is catastrophe. Now, that's a particularly bad example. But I think all of us have to begin to say to ourselves, I have to not just do what I can do to think about organizing a union. Where I'm in a situation, I have to join. We may have to pound on the door. We should remember the Congress of Industrial Organizations was in many ways the result of millions of workers pounding on the door of the American Federation of Labor, wanting to join, but being deflected, pushed back, told to wait, shunted into sort of intermediate, small little what they used to call federal locals, which weren't truly real. And at a certain point, it built up and it blew, and the Congress or the Committee for Industrial Organization was born, ultimately then became the Congress of Industrial Organization. Will we see something like that today? Well, I hope so, because these union leaderships and structures must be challenged in this regard. We've become really the business union culture that permeates far too much of the labor movement. It's all built around monitoring and taking care of the dwindling number of members that they have, ignoring for the most part the many millions, the gigantic masses outside the unions. And then when a moment like this comes, when people might be ready to roll or begin to roll, there's no mechanism to even talk to them. Think of that example that I gave, a name brand national union in this country that I have declared after 14 attempts to be impenetrable. So what chance would an ordinary worker who thought, gosh, that's the union I need to join. And there's no chance of that. So I think it's up to us to push on these leaderships, and it's going, I hope, to lead to a complete reconfiguration of the union priorities for the resources that they do possess. For everyone listening, this labor movement in the United States, it may not feel that way in Alabama, but if you take the aggregate assets of this labor movement, it is over and over and over again been documented and proven to be the most financially wealthy labor movement in the history of the world. But yet it is organizationally inactive in this regard in any, appreciative way. So it's time for us to reconsider a number of things and to actually get the wheel moving. We have nothing to wait for. But, whatever Trump should be to everyone, including the labor leadership, is this guy is no BS. This guy is not just a clown car. Maybe that struck people as what he was the first term, but this second term, we're only 100 days into it, right? And we've already seen more attacks on unions than we saw all through his first term, and equally rotten presidents on the attack. So we're going to go into a dark period, but it doesn't need to be demoralizing and defeatist. This can be a great impetus to renew and revitalize these unions, which are, in my opinion, are in great need of both things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's been a lot of just mixed responses from labor leadership, there in terms of the attacks from the Trump administration. We've seen lots of legal action, of course, to be expected. A lot of the militancy and the protests are coming from more grassroots organizations like the Federal Unionist Network, the May Day Strong Coalition, and it's, the institutions are kind of getting on board after it gets going. So I think, I guess where I'll close it there is then for the rank and file who are listening, for, the rank and file union members, or even just, working class allies out there, what's to be done for us, right? And I think you touched on this earlier, but maybe worth just expanding. What are the things that we can do and should be doing to build the sort of real mass working class movement that we're going to need to respond to this?
Yeah, isn't that the question? What do we do? It has to begin with everybody listening. There's no excuse for sitting it out. There's no excuse for just reading about it. And least of all, is there any justification for then entering all sorts of opinions and theories and whatnot into the Bible when it's not based on any experience. I would appreciate young workers or inexperienced workers who, stick the iron in the fire and let's see where it goes. They'll learn an awful lot. But as long as we remain in this very low level of union organizing with unions who are introverted and, uninterested, I'll say in many cases, of doing the work to reach out to the unorganized, we're going to be trapped. And I think we should all recognize the reason we ended up with Donald Trump a second time is because the labor movement no longer possesses the influence to really have any much of a say in our political world. Our Democratic Party takes this for granted. And, that's another discussion. But here we are now with our existence threatened. We've said that for years, but this is no drill now. The bombing is beginning to happen all around us. We may see the nullification of the National Labor Relations Act because of our thoroughly corrupt and undemocratic so-called Supreme Court. Well, the Democratic Party, to my knowledge, has never done anything to abolish that abomination, which comes down from Rome. Gosh, isn't that really a great legacy to harken back to? But if that happens, if the National Labor Relations Act is knocked out, and there's a very decent probability that it will be, all bets are off. This will be the end of your union contract, the end of your dues check, unfair labor practices, any mechanism. We've already seen this in certain states with the state labor tax on public sector employees, but this could also endanger the Railway Labor Act, which is air. And I mean, this unraveling has been many years in the making. The Republicans have never been anything other than pathologically, bitterly anti-union and anti-worker. So we fail to have a real political champion of our own in any large way and in any consistent way. So everyone has to do their part. Join a union. Go online, find the union that you should belong to. Start your own union. You don't need a permission slip from an existing union. I have started new independent unions where I live here for folks who are having the same problem that you had, Adam. They couldn't find a union to take them seriously right at that time or whatnot. We set up an independent union for them so that they could do something. I mean, it really, you have to measure somebody. I don't want to hear your complaints or your theories unless you can demonstrate to me that you've done something yourself or with real workers within your orbit to get them to begin to organize towards the goal of real union organization.
Yeah, absolutely, Chris. Well, I really appreciate it as always. Appreciate your support, your insight, and for just beating the drum and staying with that message, because everyone listening, you can talk to people, right? You can do that. You may not have the wealth or the power of folks on TV, but you can talk to people. You have a network. You know people. You have relationships with people. You know workers who need a union, right? And those are conversations that you can have. You can help plug people into this movement. Because it's going to take big scale organizing like we haven't seen in a long time.
Adam, indulge my interruption. I am officially retired. I'm sitting here at my dining room table. This is where I've sat since the beginning of the pandemic. This past week alone, I spoke to workers in several states. I spoke to workers in the food service industry, in the grocery industry, in the entertainment industry, in a somewhat of a manufacturing scenario, in the construction industry. And all of this was, in towards the goal of pushing along union organizing. Now, I've been doing this for many years, and I probably have a head start on folks, but we need to start asking people, why don't I belong to a union? Why don't you belong to a union? So it begins with, who is it? Who are we going to talk to? Do they have a union hall? Do they have a website? Can we contact them? Can we call them? We must do this. The unions may brush you off or leave you hanging, whatnot. Go to another union. Start your own union. We have to begin to fight back and form these structures. There's no time to waste here. This is, again, like I said, no drill. I think we all sort of acknowledge this, but there has to be an activity connected with it to actually talk to workers. How are we going to form an organization and a bond and a unity to prevent this employer of ours from doing whatever the hell they want? And that day is here.
Amen, brother. Amen. Well, I really appreciate it. Chris Townsend, thanks again for coming on the show. Welcome anytime, and hope you have a good day.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.